Hello and welcome back to LPBW Update, your number one source for the latest news, in-depth analysis, and exclusive theories surrounding the Roloff family. Today, we are bringing you a story that is so shocking, so brazen, it threatens to tear the fabric of the family apart forever. We're talking about an alleged scheme of staggering deception, a financial conspiracy that could have landed members of the Little People, Big World family behind bars. We have been piecing together insider reports and following a trail of financial breadcrumbs that paint a truly terrifying picture. The bombshell report we're unpacking today involves an IRS nightmare, a sophisticated tax fraud scheme, and an act of betrayal so cold it's hard to fathom. The premise is this. To save Matt Roloff from a crippling tax bill, sources allege that Caryn Chandler masterminded a plan to frame Amy Roloff for massive tax fraud, a scheme involving a fake shell company and a $500,000 phantom payment. Before we dive into the explosive details of how this alleged plot was constructed and ultimately uncovered, we need your support to continue our independent investigations. If you believe in getting to the truth and want more exclusive reports like this one, please take a moment to hit that like button. Subscribe to LPBW Update and ring that notification bell so you never miss a critical update. Your support is what allows us to dig deeper than anyone else. Now, let's get into the heart of this truly shocking story. Our story begins where so many Roloff sagas do, on the farm. But this isn't about family squabbles over property. This is about cold, hard cash. The most recent pumpkin season was, by all accounts, a monumental success. Roloff Farms saw unprecedented revenue, a testament to the brand Matt has spent a lifetime building. But as anyone who runs a successful business knows, massive profits come with an equally massive problem: a tax liability of epic proportions. According to sources familiar with the farm's finances, Matt was looking at a tax bill so large it threatened the liquidity of the entire operation. This wasn't just about writing a check. This was about a figure that could potentially force the sale of assets, halt future projects, and jeopardize the very legacy he was fighting to preserve. The stress, we are told, was immense. Matt, the grand visionary, the builder of worlds, was now facing a monolithic, faceless enemy in the Internal Revenue Service. Enter Caryn Chandler. For years, she was the farm manager, the one who knew the books, the one who understood the operational intricacies. Now, as Matt's partner and future wife, her role has evolved. She is his confidant, his strategist, and, according to our reports, the architect of a plan designed to solve Matt's monumental problem. The conversations in their new dream house, a symbol of their shared future, allegedly turned from blueprints and paint swatches to balance sheets and tax codes. Matt, overwhelmed and desperate for a solution, is said to have vented his frustrations, lamenting the government's claim on his hard-earned money. He needed a miracle, a clever accounting move, a way to reduce his taxable income significantly and legally. But the solution Caryn allegedly devised would be anything but legal. This is where our exclusive theory, based on a careful analysis of business formation, practices, and financial loopholes, begins to take shape. The plan was as audacious as it was illegal. The goal: create a massive, fictitious business expense for Roloff Farms that would slash its taxable income. To do this, they needed to pay a company for services never rendered. But who would they pay? Paying a known associate would create a clear and traceable conflict of interest. Paying a random company would mean the money was gone for good. The scheme required a recipient entity they could control, one whose name would deflect suspicion. And according to the information we've gathered, Caryn's eyes landed on the perfect scapegoat, Amy Roloff. The brilliance of the alleged scheme lies in its cynical use of Amy's identity. Amy, now happily remarried and building a new life with Chris Merrick, was financially disentangled from the farm's day-to-day operations. She was the perfect patsy because her name, A. Roloff, still carried immense weight and legitimacy in the context of the family business. The plan, as insiders suggest, was to create a shell company in her name, making it appear as though the farm had hired her for high-level consulting work. This would create the enormous write-off Matt needed, effectively shifting the tax burden for that income onto Amy, who would be completely unaware she had supposedly earned it. The first step was creating the corporate entity. Late one night, from the comfort of her and Matt's new home, Caryn allegedly went online and registered a new limited liability company, or LLC. The name she chose was a stroke of manipulative genius, A. Roloff Strategic Solutions, LLC. It sounded official, professional, and most importantly, indisputably connected to Amy Roloff. To complete the registration, she needed a business address. This is where a key piece of inside knowledge came into play. Caryn, from her years as farm manager, allegedly knew of an old P.O. box that was once associated with one of Amy's side businesses, a venture she had let go of years ago. It was a forgotten piece of their shared history. With a few clicks, the P.O. box was reactivated and listed as the official address for the new LLC, adding another layer of seeming authenticity. For anyone at the IRS looking at the paperwork, it would appear that Amy Roloff had simply started a new consulting firm and was doing business with her ex-husband's farm, a plausible, if slightly unusual, arrangement. With the corporate shell in place, the next step was to create the paper trail. Caryn, leveraging her experience with farm administration, allegedly drafted a sophisticated and detailed invoice. This wasn't some hastily scribbled note. It was a professional document, complete with the A. Roloff Strategic Solutions, LLC letterhead. The invoice billed Roloff Farms for a staggering $500,000. And what were the services rendered? The descriptions were vague, yet official-sounding corporate jargon. Q4 strategic brand repositioning, market expansion feasibility studies, and operational efficiency consulting. These were services so nebulous, so difficult to quantify, that they would be hard to disprove without a deep dive audit. The invoice was dated to fall within the peak profitability window of the pumpkin season, making the expense look like a necessary cost of doing business during their busiest time. Now, the most critical part of the plan, the money transfer, with the fake invoice submitted to the farm's accounting department, which, given Caryn's influence, would likely have processed it with few questions asked. The payment was authorized. A wire transfer for exactly $500,000 was initiated from the Roloff Farms business account. But where did it go? It was sent to a newly opened bank account for A. Roloff Strategic Solutions, LLC. Opening this account was another alleged act of fraud. To do so, Caryn would have needed Amy's personal information, including her social security number, details she may have had access to from old farm employment records. By setting up the account with herself as the secret signatory and using her own contact information, she ensured that all bank statements, all correspondence, all evidence of this account's existence would be diverted away from Amy and come directly to her. Amy would never see a single piece of mail, a single email, a single notification about the $500,000 that was now, on paper, her taxable income. On the farm's books, the transaction was perfect. They now had a legitimate-looking invoice and a corresponding wire transfer receipt for a $500,000 business expense. Their taxable income was instantly reduced by that amount, saving Matt and the farm a colossal sum of money, potentially in the six-figure range, when it came time to file their taxes. Matt, we are told, was relieved. The crushing weight of the tax bill had been lifted. He likely didn't ask about the details, trusting that Caryn, his savvy business partner, had found a clever, albeit aggressive, tax strategy. He was now free to focus on his building projects, on the future, on the dream house, blissfully unaware or perhaps willfully ignorant of the criminal conspiracy that had just been executed to protect his empire. For Caryn, it was a moment of triumph. She had protected Matt, secured their financial future, and, in her mind, outsmarted the entire system. But Caryn's alleged plan had a second, even more sinister component. It wasn't just about the tax write-off. What happened to the $500,000 sitting in the shell company's bank account? According to sources who have been piecing together the money trail, the funds did not sit there for long. Almost immediately after the wire transfer cleared, a second transfer was initiated. The entire $500,000 sum was moved out of the Roloff Strategic Solutions, LLC, account and into a private high-yield investment account. And whose name was on that account? Not Matt Roloff's, not Roloff Farms. The account, reports suggest, was solely in the name of Caryn Chandler. This is the detail that transforms the story from a misguided attempt to help Matt into a calculated act of personal enrichment. This wasn't just about saving the farm from taxes. It was about Caryn allegedly seizing an opportunity to pocket a life-changing amount of money tax-free. By passing it through the shell company in Amy's name, she created a firewall. The farm wrote it off as an expense. The IRS would see it as income for Amy. And Caryn, she would have a $500,000 windfall with no official record of her ever receiving it. It was a seemingly perfect crime, a complex web of deceit where every loose end was tied up and every trail led to the wrong person. For months, the scheme worked flawlessly. Life went on. Matt and Caryn oversaw construction on their new home, their financial anxieties a distant memory. Amy and Chris continued to build their life together, traveling, hosting dinners, and enjoying their marriage, completely oblivious to the financial time bomb that was ticking away, set to detonate in their lives. The farm filed its taxes, proudly claiming the $500,000 deduction. The shell company, Roloff Strategic Solutions, LLC, filed nothing because, as far as the IRS was concerned, it was a sole proprietorship LLC, and its income would be reported on the personal tax return of its owner, Roloff. When Amy filed her taxes, she and her accountant reported only her actual income from her books, her speaking engagements, and other legitimate sources. They, of course, did not report the $500,000 she had never received, never even known about. This is where the automated, all-seeing eye of the Internal Revenue Service comes into the picture. The IRS runs on a massive computer system that is, at its core, a pattern-matching machine. One of its primary functions is to cross-reference income reports. Businesses report what they pay out to contractors and other entities on forms like the 1099 NEC. Individuals report what they receive in income in their 1040s. When these numbers don't match, a red flag is automatically raised. In this case, the system saw a 1099 form filed by Roloff Farms, or its equivalent in their business filings, showing a payment of $500,000 to an entity associated with Amy Roloff's Social Security number. But when the system looked at Amy Roloff's 1040 tax return, that $500,000 was nowhere to be found. This discrepancy triggered the dispatch of a certified letter from the IRS Service Center. One afternoon, months after the tax season had ended, the mail carrier arrived at Amy and Chris's home with a letter that required a signature. It was an official IRS envelope, thick and intimidating. Amy, like most people, felt a jolt of anxiety. No one is ever happy to receive certified mail from the IRS. She signed for it, her mind racing through a dozen possibilities. Did she make a mistake? Did her accountant miss something? She opened the envelope and her blood ran cold. Inside was a document known as a CP2000 notice. For those who have never had the misfortune of receiving one, a CP2000 is not a full-blown audit. It is a notice of a proposed change to your tax return based on information the IRS has received from third parties that doesn't match what you reported. The letter was polite but firm. It stated that, based on their records, she had failed to report $500,000 in income from Roloff Strategic Solutions, LLC. It then went on to calculate the tax she owed on that unreported income, which, given the tax bracket that amount of money would put her in, was a staggering sum, well over $100,000. But that wasn't all. The notice also included penalties for substantial understatement of tax, plus interest that had been accruing daily since the tax deadline. The grand total she was now being told she owed was a life-altering amount of money. Amy's first reaction was utter confusion. Roloff Strategic Solutions, LLC? She had never heard of it. $500,000. It was a fantasy. She knew her finances down to the penny. She had never received such a payment. She showed the letter to Chris, whose face turned ashen. They both knew it was a mistake, a colossal, terrifying error on the part of the IRS. Their minds reeled. Could her identity have been stolen by a random criminal? Was this some sort of sophisticated scam? The name of the company was the most unsettling part. Roloff. It felt personal. It felt targeted. Panic began to set in. This wasn't a small clerical error that could be cleared up with a phone call. This was an accusation of $500,000 in tax evasion. The notice gave her a deadline to respond. She could either agree with the changes and pay the astronomical bill, or she could challenge the findings and provide proof that the IRS was wrong. But how do you prove you didn't receive money? How do you fight a phantom income? Amy knew immediately that this was far beyond her ability to handle. She was entering a battle against a bureaucratic giant, and she needed an expert in her corner. She was no longer just a TV personality or a cookbook author. She was now the target of a federal investigation, and she was determined to find out who was behind it. This is the moment that defines Amy Roloff's character in this saga. Instead of crumbling under the pressure, she turned her fear into action. She knew that whoever did this had used her name and her reputation, and she would not let it stand. Her first call was to her accountant, who was as baffled as she was. He confirmed that no such income had ever passed through her accounts and advised her that this level of discrepancy suggested not just an error, but potential fraud. He gave her the most important piece of advice she would receive. You need a forensic accountant. A forensic accountant is a different breed of financial expert. They are part financial detective, part bloodhound. They specialize in uncovering fraud, tracing hidden assets, and following complex money trails through a maze of corporate shells and digital transactions. Amy began a search for the best. She didn't want a local bookkeeper. She wanted a shark, someone who had experience dealing with high-stakes white-collar crime and wasn't intimidated by the IRS. After a series of consultations, she found her champion, a man we'll call Mr. Davies, a seasoned forensic accountant with a reputation for being relentless, discreet, and incredibly effective. The first meeting with Mr. Davies was in a sterile, confidential office building, a world away from the rustic charm of the farm. Amy, accompanied by a worried but supportive Chris, laid out the story. She presented the CP2000 notice, her tax returns, her bank statements, everything. She explained her history with the farm, with Matt, and with Caryn. Mr. Davies listened intently, his face unreadable. He asked pointed questions about her past business dealings, her relationships, and who might have had access to her personal information. As Amy spoke, the name Caryn Chandler came up repeatedly. not as an accusation, but as the one person who had been in a position of administrative power on the farm for years, the one person who knew the financial ins and outs. Mr. Davies took the case. He explained that his first step would be to file a power of attorney with the IRS, allowing him to speak to them on Amy's behalf and get a temporary stay on any collection actions. His second step would be to get every piece of information the IRS had about this mystery income. He needed to know who filed the 1099, what address was listed for the payer, and what taxpayer identification number was used for a Roloff Strategic Solutions, LLC. His third and most crucial step would be to launch his own investigation to follow the money. He assured Amy of one thing: digital money always leaves a trail. Someone created that LLC. Someone opened that bank account. Someone moved that money, and he was going to find them. The investigation began immediately. Mr. Davies' team submitted document requests to the state's corporate commission to get the formation papers for the LLC. They subpoenaed the bank for all records associated with the shell company's account, and they began a deep dive into the digital forensics of the LLC's creation. As the documents started to roll in, the picture became clearer, and it was chilling. The LLC formation documents were the first major break. They were filed online. The filing listed the P.O. box Caryn had allegedly resurrected, and it listed Amy Roloff as the sole member. But the key piece of evidence was not on the document itself. It was in the metadata. Mr. Davies hired a cybersecurity expert to work with the state's IT department to trace the digital origins of the online filing. Every computer connected to the internet has a unique identifier called an IP address. And while sophisticated criminals can use VPNs and other tools to mask their location, this was a crime of arrogance. The perpetrator likely never imagined anyone would dig this deep. The expert traced the IP address used to register a Roloff Strategic Solutions, LLC. It was not a random address from a coffee shop or a public library. The IP address was registered to the primary internet service provider for a very specific residential address, the location of Matt Roloff and Caryn Chandler's newly constructed dream house. This was the first smoking gun. It was a direct digital link from the creation of the fraudulent company to Caryn's own home. It placed her at the keyboard at the scene of the crime. While not yet definitive proof that she was the one who typed it, it was a powerful piece of circumstantial evidence that obliterated the possibility of this being a random act of identity theft by a stranger. The net was beginning to tighten. The second smoking gun came from the bank records. The subpoenaed documents arrived in a thick, sealed envelope at Mr. Davies' office. They contained every single detail about the bank account opened in the name of the LLC. The records showed the initial deposit, the $500,000 wire transfer from Roloff Farms. They also showed the signature cards and account opening documents. The personal information was Amy's, but the contact phone number and email address belonged to Caryn Chandler. And then there it was in black and white. The transaction history. Just 2 days after the $500,000 landed in the account, the full amount was wired out. The destination account was not with some obscure offshore bank. It was a mainstream, reputable investment house. And the name on the destination account was Caryn Chandler. The money trail was now complete. It was an undeniable, irrefutable path from Matt's farm to a fake company set up from Caryn's house in Amy's name, and then directly into Caryn's personal investment portfolio. The forensic accountant now had a file brimming with explosive evidence. He had the corporate filings, the IP address trace, the bank statements, the signature cards, and the final destination of the stolen funds. The scheme was no longer a matter of theory or speculation. It was a documented case of identity theft, bank fraud, and tax fraud. Mr. Davies called Amy and asked her to come to his office. He told her, "We've got them." He had uncovered every sordid detail of the plot, a plot born of financial desperation and personal greed, a plot that was about to bring the entire Roloff world crashing down. The stage was now set for a reckoning, a confrontation that would force Matt Roloff to choose between his legacy and his fiancée, all while Amy held the power to send them both to prison. What she would do with that power was the only question that remained. When Amy walked out of her forensic accountant's office, the world seemed to tilt on its axis. The cold, hard proof contained in that file was a weight in her hands, a confirmation of a betrayal so profound it was difficult to process. This wasn't a business dispute. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a calculated criminal act perpetrated by Caryn Chandler, a woman who had once been her employee, a woman who was now the center of her ex-husband's life. The plan wasn't just to save Matt money. It was to use Amy as an unwitting pawn to load her with a ruinous tax debt, all while Caryn secretly funneled the $500,000 into her own pockets. Chris, seeing the look on Amy's face, wrapped an arm around her. His anger was palpable, but his focus was on Amy. He saw past the fury to the hurt, the deep wound of being targeted by people she had once considered family. In the car, the silence was heavy. Amy's mind was a whirlwind of emotions: white-hot rage at Caryn's audacity, a deep, chilling disappointment in Matt for his obliviousness, or worse, his complicity, and a surge of vindication. She wasn't crazy. The IRS notice wasn't a mistake. It was a weapon aimed directly at her, and now she knew who had fired it. But beneath it all was a profound sense of sadness. The final ugly chapter of her life on the farm was being written not with nostalgia or bittersweet memories, but with felony charges and financial fraud. Chris broke the silence, his voice firm and clear. "You can't let them get away with this, Amy. This is bigger than money. They tried to ruin you." He was right. This was about more than just clearing her name with the IRS. This was about justice. But what did justice look like? Her first instinct was to call Matt and scream, to confront Caryn, to expose them to the world. But Chris, ever the voice of reason, urged caution. "They've played dirty," he said. "We have to play smart. We have the evidence. Now we need a strategy." This was not a family drama to be hashed out over the phone. This was a legal matter, a serious crime with serious consequences. The forensic accountant had given them the bullets. Now they needed a general to plan the battle. Following Mr. Davies' recommendation, Amy secured a consultation with one of the top white-collar crime litigators in the state, a woman we'll call Eleanor Vance. Vance was a former federal prosecutor known for her sharp mind and steel trap negotiating skills. Her office, with its panoramic city views and library of leather-bound legal books, was an intimidating fortress of power. Amy, Chris, and Mr. Davies sat across a vast mahogany table from her. They didn't speak. Mr. Davies simply opened his file and began to lay out the evidence, piece by damning piece. The LLC registration, the IP address report pinpointing Matt and Caryn's home, the fraudulent invoice, the bank statements showing the wire transfer from the farm, and the final kill shot, the statement from Caryn's private investment account showing the receipt of the $500,000. Vance listened without interruption, her expression unreadable. She examined each document, her eyes scanning for weaknesses, for any possible alternative explanation. When Mr. Davies was finished, she leaned back in her chair and looked at Amy. "Ms. Roloff," she began, her voice calm and measured, "what you have here is not just a strong case. It is an airtight case. We are talking about multiple federal offenses: wire fraud, bank fraud, aggravated identity theft, and tax evasion. If I were to walk this file over to the U.S. Attorney's Office, they would likely seek indictments against both Caryn Chandler as the primary actor and Matt Roloff as a co-conspirator, whether he was witting or not. The financial benefit to his farm establishes his motive and potential involvement. We're talking about significant prison time. The words prison time hung in the air. Amy felt a knot tighten in her stomach. As much as she had been betrayed, the thought of being the person to send the father of her children to jail was a heavy burden. She had 4 children and multiple grandchildren to think about. A public, sensational trial would drag all of them through the mud. The media frenzy would be unbearable, a circus that would define the Roloff family for generations. She wanted justice, but she also wanted peace. She wanted to be made whole, and she wanted to be free of this mess forever. Sensing her hesitation, Vance leaned forward. "There is another way," she said, "a path that achieves all of your goals without the chaos of a criminal prosecution. We don't go to the government. Not yet. We go to them. We leverage their terror of a criminal investigation to force a private settlement that puts you in complete control." Vance then laid out a brilliant, multi-pronged strategy. First, the objective was not punishment. It was restitution and protection. Amy needed to be made financially whole immediately. This meant Matt would have to pay the entire proposed tax bill from the CP1000 notice, including all penalties and accrued interest. Second, Matt would have to reimburse Amy for every single penny she had spent defending herself. Mr. Davies' entire invoice and Vance's legal retainer, plus all future fees. This was non-negotiable. The victim should not bear the cost of the crime. Third, and this was Vance's masterstroke, was the demand for a legal confession. It would be a sworn, notarized affidavit drafted by Vance herself to be signed by Matt Roloff. In it, he would have to detail the entire scheme, acknowledging the creation of the fraudulent LLC and stating, under penalty of perjury, that Caryn Chandler was the sole architect and executor of the plan. This document would be Amy's insurance policy. It would be her ultimate trump card. If Matt or Caryn ever broke the terms of their agreement, ever spoke a single word against her, ever tried to spin this story in any other way, she could release the confession and the criminal case would be handed to the authorities on a silver platter. It would give Amy permanent power over them. Fourth, the entire matter would be bound by a strict non-disclosure agreement, but one that was heavily weighted in Amy's favor. They would be forbidden from ever speaking of this, while Amy would retain the right to disclose the information to the authorities should they ever breach the agreement. In essence, Matt and Caryn would be forced to buy Amy's silence, and the price was their complete and total capitulation. Amy felt a wave of relief. This was the path. It was strong, it was strategic, and it gave her back the control that had been stolen from her. She agreed to the plan. The first move was made not with a phone call from Amy, but with a crisp, formal letter from Eleanor Vance's law office sent via courier to Matt Roloff's business attorney. The letter was deliberately vague, but carried an unmistakable threat. It stated that their firm had been retained by Amy Roloff to address serious financial and criminal irregularities discovered in relation to Roloff Farms and a corporate entity named Roloff Strategic Solutions, LLC. It requested an urgent in-person meeting with Matt and his legal counsel to present their findings. It explicitly stated that Caryn Chandler was not to be present. This was designed to isolate Matt, to force him to face the evidence without Caryn there to spin it or whisper in his ear. The response was almost immediate. Matt's lawyer, likely sensing the gravity of the situation from the tone of the letter and the reputation of Vance's firm, agreed to the meeting. It was scheduled for 2 days later, not at the farm, not at a neutral coffee shop, but on Amy's turf, the main conference room at Eleanor Vance's law firm. The day of the meeting, the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Amy and Chris arrived first, meeting with Vance and Mr. Davies in a private office to go over the plan one last time. Amy was nervous, but Vance's calm demeanor was contagious. "Remember," Vance told her, "you say nothing. You let me do the talking. Your power today comes from your silence." They moved to the conference room. Amy and her team sat on one side of the massive table. The file, thick with evidence, sat directly in front of Vance. Matt arrived with his longtime business lawyer, a man who had handled the farm's affairs for years. Matt looked confident, perhaps a little annoyed, likely assuming this was some new salvo in the ongoing financial disputes over the farm buyout. He probably thought Amy was making a desperate money grab. He nodded curtly at Amy, who returned a cool, steady gaze, her face a mask of composure. They all took their seats. After brief, sterile introductions, Eleanor Vance began. She didn't open with accusations. She opened with facts. "Gentlemen," she started, her voice cutting through the silence, "we are here today because a routine IRS inquiry on behalf of my client has uncovered a sophisticated scheme to defraud both Ms. Roloff and the United States government. I am now going to walk you through our findings." She started by placing a copy of the IRS CP 2000 notice in front of Matt and his lawyer. It begins here. A notice for an unreported income of $500,000, resulting in a proposed tax liability with penalties and interest totaling over $200,000. Matt's lawyer glanced at it, a flicker of confusion on his face. Matt scoffed. "This has to be a mistake. The farm may have paid her for some consulting, but never that amount. Amy, what is this?" Amy remained silent, her eyes locked on him, letting Vance control the room. "It's no mistake, Mr. Roloff," Vance continued, her tone icy. She slid the next document across the table, the Articles of Organization for A. Roloff Strategic Solutions, LLC. "Are you familiar with this company?" Matt looked at it. "No, I mean, it has her name on it. I assume it's one of her businesses." "My client has never heard of this company," Vance stated flatly. "It was registered online on October 28th of last year." She then slid the third document over. It was the report from the cybersecurity expert. This is a trace of the IP address that was used to create this fraudulent entity. As you can see, it resolves to the internet service account at your personal residence, Mr. Roloff. Matt's jaw tightened. His lawyer's eyes widened slightly. For the first time, the confident posture Matt had walked in with began to dissolve. Vance didn't pause. "On November 5th, this invoice," she produced a copy of the fake invoice, "was submitted to your farm's accounting department for $500,000. The next day, a wire transfer for that exact amount was sent from the Roloff Farms account." She then produced the wire confirmation. Matt looked at the documents, a dawning horror spreading across his face. He recognized the invoice format. He recognized the account numbers. "This is a farm expense," he stammered. "Caryn handled this. She said we needed an end-of-year strategic expense to lower our tax burden. She said Amy agreed to it." "Did Amy sign a contract?" Vance asked sharply. "Did you ever speak to her about this $500,000 consulting fee?" Matt was silent. His face had gone pale. His lawyer was now reading the documents with a grim, focused intensity. "Because my client knew nothing about it," Vance pressed on. "And now, for the final piece of the puzzle." She slid the last set of documents across the table. They were the subpoenaed bank records. "Here are the account opening documents for the LLC, using my client's stolen personal information. And here is the complete transaction history. You will see the $500,000 deposit from your farm, and you will see 2 days later a $500,000 withdrawal. It was a wire transfer to this account." The final page was a statement from a private investment account. At the top, in bold print, was the account holder's name, Caryn Chandler. The room fell into a deathly silence. Matt stared at the paper, his mind struggling to process the irrefutable black and white proof of what had happened. The color drained from his face. This wasn't an aggressive tax strategy. This was theft. This was a criminal conspiracy orchestrated by his fiancée from his own home, using his own business as a vehicle. He saw it all in a flash: the potential headlines, the federal agents, the ruin of his reputation, the destruction of his family's name, the very real possibility of prison. He wasn't just a victim of Caryn's greed. In the eyes of the law, he was an accomplice. He looked up at Amy, and for the first time, he saw not an angry ex-wife, but the woman whose life his partner had tried to destroy for money. The arrogance was gone, replaced by pure, unadulterated fear. His lawyer, a man paid to be unflappable, cleared his throat. "Ms. Vance Kadekay," he said quietly, "what is it you want?" Vance leaned forward, her voice low and firm. "Here is what is going to happen. Your client has two choices. Option A is that I take this file, I walk it down the street to the IRS Criminal Investigation Division and the U.S. Attorney's Office, and we let the federal justice system take its course. Given the evidence, I am confident Ms. Chandler will be indicted, and Roloff will spend the next several years as a person of interest in a federal criminal investigation, with all that entails for his business and his family. Or there is option B." She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. "Option B is that before we leave this room today, Mr. Roloff will arrange a wire transfer to my firm's trust account for the full amount of the tax liability, penalties, and interest outlined in this CP 2000 notice. He will also wire an additional sum to cover my client's complete accounting and legal fees to date. The total amount is," she glanced at a paper, $472,851.32. She continued, "Furthermore, Mr. Roloff will sign a sworn affidavit, which I have already prepared." She slid a final multi-page document across the table. "This affidavit details the entire scheme, from the creation of the LLC to the transfer of funds, and explicitly names Caryn Chandler as the sole architect and beneficiary of the fraud. It will be notarized here today. In exchange, my client will agree not to pursue criminal charges or file a civil suit, provided you adhere to a strict and permanent non-disclosure agreement. You will have 1 hour to make your decision." Matt's lawyer picked up the affidavit and began to read. Matt just sat there, looking utterly broken. He knew he had no choice. The evidence was absolute. A fight would lead to public ruin and potential incarceration. Vance had offered him a way out, an expensive and humiliating one, but a way out nonetheless. He looked at his lawyer, who gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. It was the only move to make. "We'll do it," Matt's lawyer said, his voice heavy with defeat. The next hour was a surreal scene of quiet, frantic activity. Matt, looking like a ghost, made a series of tense calls to his bank, authorizing the massive wire transfer. While he did that, his lawyer meticulously reviewed the confession, suggesting minor changes in wording that Vance coolly rejected. This was not a negotiation, it was a surrender. A notary was brought into the room. With a trembling hand, Matt Roloff signed the document, page by page, that detailed his fiancée's crimes and his own negligence. He was signing away his power, his pride, and any future he thought he had that wasn't subject to Amy's silence. Once the wire transfers were confirmed and the notarized confession was safely in Eleanor Vance's briefcase, the meeting was over. Matt and his lawyer stood up and left without another word. They walked out of the building into a world that was, for them, forever changed. Matt now had to go home and confront the woman he loved, armed with the knowledge that she was a thief who had nearly sent them both to prison. For Amy, the moment was not one of triumphant celebration, but of quiet, profound relief. The nightmare was over. The IRS bill would be paid. Her expenses were covered. She was financially whole. But more than that, she was safe. Tucked away in her lawyer's vault was a legal document that ensured her protection. The confession was her shield. Caryn Chandler, the woman who had held so much power on the farm and in Matt's life, was now completely and utterly powerless. Her fate, her freedom, was now contingent on Amy Roloff's grace. Amy had walked into the lion's den, not with a roar, but with a file of evidence, and she had walked out with everything. She had won, she was free, she was vindicated, and she held all the cards, leaving Caryn's future in the ruins of her own greed.